Welcome to this explainer. We are jumping right in today because we're going to do something absolutely fascinating. We are systematically peeling back the layers of our most fundamental assumptions about sex, gender identity, and what it means to be a person. We're going to be exploring the groundbreaking, highly influential theories of post-structuralist philosopher Judith Butler, right alongside some foundational work by Adrienne Rich. Now, if you're already familiar with gender studies, you know these texts completely reshape the landscape. They are the ultimate masterclass in deconstruction. But the philosophical architecture here is dense, to say the least. So we're going to break it all down visually, step by step. Okay, let's start with Simone de Beauvoir's famous claim from The Second Sex. One is not born a woman, but rather becomes one. This is our hook, right? It instantly challenges that deeply ingrained assumption that gender is just biologically innate. Beauvoir is suggesting that woman isn't some predetermined biological destiny, but a state of being that you become under cultural pressure. This separation of biological sex from cultural gender really set the stage for everything that followed. But, as we'll see, Judith Butler takes this deconstruction much, much further. So here is our roadmap for navigating all of this. First, the myth of natural gender. Second, the heterosexual matrix. Third, gender as a performance. Fourth, drag as copying a copy. And finally, making gender trouble. Let's start deconstructing. Section 1. The myth of natural gender. Let's dismantle what we assume is the biological foundation of identity. This right here brilliantly illustrates the paradigm shift we're talking about. In the traditional framework, we assume this really straightforward causal timeline. Your biological sex determines your gender, which then determines your heterosexual desire. It feels completely natural. But Butler completely flips this script. Butler argues that social systems actually manufacture the illusion of a natural pre-discursive sex. Basically, the idea that a biological reality exists before culture or language even touches it, that's a myth used to enforce specific norms. In other words, gender isn't just the cultural meaning applied to a natural body. Gender is the very machine that produces the idea that sex is a natural biological binary in the first place. Moving on to Section 2, the heterosexual matrix, and the system that enforces these norms. To really understand this matrix, we've got to look at Adrienne Rich's foundational concept of compulsory heterosexuality. Rich argues that heterosexuality is not some innate default human preference. Actually, it's a carefully maintained, manufactured, and heavily policed political institution. Under this framework, the idea that women are naturally drawn to men is culturally enforced to maintain specific power dynamics, almost always at the expense of women's own autonomy. Looking at this dense academic excerpt from Rich's text, her argument is stark. She asserts that male power systematically denies women their own sexuality. She essentially catalogs all these historical and cultural tools, from strictures on behavior to the literal erasure of lesbian existence in archives, that are used to carry out a colonizing male identification. The core argument is that heterosexuality is compelled through social structures that marginalize any alternative ways of living or identifying. So the crucial takeaway here is perfectly summarized by theorist Monique Witting. She says that the very category of binary sex, that strict division of male and female, was artificially created for a highly specific political purpose, to establish society as heterosexual. Think about it. If you want a society where heterosexuality is the mandatory norm, you literally have to first create a rigid binary of two opposing sexes that are supposedly destined for one another. Section 3. Gender is a performance. Because if sex and gender aren't natural facts, why on earth do they feel so incredibly real to us every single day? Butler proposes a totally radical solution to this problem. Gender is not something you are, it's something you do. It's a continuous performance. We normally think we have this internal, core gender identity that we just express outwardly, right? Well, Butler argues the exact opposite. The outward expressions, the repeated daily acts, are actually what create the illusion that there is an internal core at all. The performance comes first. So how does this actually happen? This illusion of an inner psychic essence is basically painted onto the surface of the body through mundane, repeated stylizations over time. Just think about how we are taught to walk, how to sit, how to gesture, or how to speak based on our assigned gender. These are not natural reflexes, guys. They are learned behaviors. By endlessly repeating the gait, the posture, the gesture, the move, the body becomes culturally marked. And because literally everyone is constantly performing these acts around us, gender achieves the appearance of something completely natural and inevitable. Borrowing a concept directly from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, Butler really drives this home. Gender is a verb rather than a noun. There is no pre-existing, fully formed subject who just wakes up and decides to perform gender. The performance itself is what constitutes the subject. You become recognizable as a person in society precisely by participating in this ongoing, mandatory mime of gender norms. The doer is just a fiction that we add to the deeds we're continuously repeating. Mind-blowing, right? Which brings us to Section 4, drag, and copying a copy. To truly grasp how this compulsory performance operates, Butler uses a brilliant example. Aretha Franklin singing her hit song, "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman." Butler points out that even a quote-unquote natural woman is participating in an act of heterosexual drag. Just look at the lyrics. The song itself implies that naturalness isn't innate. It's an effect that has to be confirmed by a heterosexual partner. Aretha is essentially singing about a metaphorical substitution, participating in the grand illusion of a deep inner reality. And this perfectly illustrates the distinction Butler is making. The so-called natural heterosexual identity is deeply, deeply invested in hiding its own performative nature. It desperately wants to be seen as the unquestioned original. But the drag queen, through hyperbole and theatricality, drag exposes the secret. Drag doesn't imitate a true gender. Instead, it reveals that all gender is an approximation. Heterosexual identities are themselves just endless, panicked imitations of an idealized norm that doesn't even exist in nature. Ultimately, Butler concludes with this absolute powerhouse of a thought. All gender is a copy of a copy. It is a total fabrication that produces the very notion of a natural original, but only as a mere effect of the imitation itself. When a drag performer mimes gender, they aren't copying a real thing. They're copying the cultural idea of a thing. And this proves that the straight, cisgender world is doing the exact same kind of copying. They're just doing it without acknowledging the script. So if gender is endlessly constructed and maintained through repetition, how can we disrupt it? Section 5. Making gender trouble. Butler argues that because gender only exists through constant repetition, it is perpetually vulnerable. If we fail to repeat it perfectly, or if we purposefully redeploy this required repetition in dissonant, hyperbolic ways, we can subvert the whole system. By fabricating gender in ways that intentionally confuse the rigid lines between sex, gender, and desire, we expose the fragile illusion of the heterosexual original. We can work sexuality against identity, refusing to let our practices be neatly categorized by systems that just want to control them. And that is exactly what it means to make gender trouble. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought, inspired by the source material. Turn the lens on yourself for a second. Analyze the very words you use daily. Does your own language unwittingly perform and reproduce these binary gender norms? And what about the AI tools we increasingly rely on for information? Are they unconsciously repeating the law of gender, or can we use them to displace it? As you go about your day-to-day, ask yourself where you are simply copying the copy, and where you might actually have the power to introduce a little bit of trouble. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the matrix.